humanity. Keep watching.
Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hello, welcome to the Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering. I'm host and with Carlo Parcelli, who is my co-host. Today we're going to discuss the effects of culture. How can culture be preserved in a democratic way? How can culture counteract the confusion of politics? We'll tie that in with some of the current Nobel Peace Laureates, as well as maybe at the end discuss a little bit about QAnon. So what can we say about, for instance, Carlo, how can we talk about the canon or the literary spectrum without making it a confusing political thing? You know, it's like there's so much out there politically that confuses, and how these cultural or these political power elites usurp a lot of the cultural power that the people have and take it and make it into for their own agenda. It fascinates me and infuriates me at the same time. How do you feel about how they do that? We were just kind of going through a little bit of how the CIA infiltrates various creative writing programs and uses culture to promote its agenda. You know, can you give some examples of that?
Well, I'd like to begin by talking about something that's in the news right now,
okay.
And which touches upon that through the discipline of journalism or so-called journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the two winners of the Nobel Peace Prize this year, Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov. And I was especially incensed by something that Maria Ressa said in regards to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Mm-hmm. There's a short statement that's available online, just a minute and a half, where she's asked about WikiLeaks, and her response is one of total ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
She knows not what the fuck she's talking about. She has no idea what she's talking about, and it's in her expression. But she says that WikiLeaks, she's more or less against what they represent because they simply dump material out into the public mm-hmm. sphere, and she implies that this endangers the people, the names of people or the organizations that appear in these so-called dumps. Well, nothing could be farther from the truth. WikiLeaks vets material very carefully. In fact, when it came to the Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning material, they vetted it for over a year. It was actually the Guardian newspaper which wanted to rush the publication. That's public knowledge. Mm-hmm. Now, this woman just won the fucking Nobel Prize, and she doesn't know that. She doesn't know that. That's horrendous. So that set my radar off. So I started looking her up. Well, she takes money from the National Endowment for Democracy. She takes money from that coup instigator, Pierre Omidyar, who runs The Intercept. She takes money from everybody. Now, I'm not saying, she attacks Duterte, and Duterte's an animal, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
That fucker in the Philippines is a dog,
mm-hmm.
okay? But the only reason he's on the outs with the U.S. is because he's made overtures to China and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he'd be the new Marcos. Oh, we love Duterte. He's
right.
Like Marcos. You know, if he was telling the line, like a lot of our dictators have in the past, there wouldn't be any problem with him, and there wouldn't be any fucking Nobel Prize for Miss Ressa, who's as stupid as the person we talked about, this idiot from the State Department last week that thought that Nicaragua was an island. They're mm-hmm. in the same category as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as Dmitry Muratov is concerned, he too has NED connections. Now they're a little more distant, but the fact of the matter is that his main backer, a man named an oligarch named Levdev, has backed out of his newspaper years ago, but he's so it, so he still has backing from Gorbachev, but I couldn't find any direct connection to the National Endowment for Democracy, for example. But there's these journalistic organizations that give out these prizes and hand out these funds that are connected to the National Endowment for Democracy, which is, of course, the Central Intelligence Agency. So these people are tainted, and so is the whole goddamn prize. So as we want to talk about the history in part of the Nobel Prize, we could go down the list of former people who have won it and pick out the CIA flacks, the people who are flacking for the West. So all it is another propaganda arm. That's what the Nobel Prize is. I guess as it goes closer to the sciences, it's incredibly fallible in a lot of ways. But at least it must be pure, because the sciences and the are not as tainted by the subjectivity that belies the arts. But this was just this statement by Ressa was so disgusting, and it's like if she really had an influence, it's going to cost so many lives. It's just beyond the pale.
And Assange himself is already in enough trouble. It's like, they've tried to discredit his name. They've already pretty much tortured him to no extent. I believe under Trump, there was a lot of talk about, changing the laws to where you could actually prosecute this as a kind of a treasonous offense when it's really a form of journalism. And so that would alter the entire nature of what Glenn Greenwald talked a lot about this, where the nature of journalism would be completely changed, because now journalists can't tell the truth and use, the internet and stuff to research. If they were to present it that way, then it would be considered, they could say, well, this is treasonous. I mean, to use the kind of technology that WikiLeaks uses to inform the public, just simply telling the truth has become, and journalism would become an act of treason. And so there was a lot more at stake than the persona of Assange in these discussions. I know a lot of people were saying, well, it's all about Assange. It's not really about Assange. It's about the nature of how we, combat the political system and, take arms against it. It doesn't necessarily not physical arms, but cultural arms, and telling the truth and letting people know what our governments are doing, how their complex system of networks are, and how they interact with each other and cooperate, and they're all these factions that occur, and all the things that WikiLeaks, showed. And especially one of my favorites was when they showed how corrupt Hillary Clinton was.
Yeah.
Absolutely monstrous stuff. Clinton and her comrades. I mean, just I know Assange directly stated where he said, Clinton is a sociopath. She's a well-connected, sadistic sociopath. And I think if you follow the trail, then you'll find that it's probably, anybody that does a little research on that, on some of those things that Assange brought to light, will find that there's a lot of just surface level charm and all the stuff that comes with being a psychopath or a sociopath. You think these politicians have your back, and they're really just playing a game. They're just giving you concessions.
Yeah.
And how this comment, even though you think if this was just any other person, but this is a Nobel laureate, and so now that's the cultural influence there is being brought to attention as to her saying this. What implications would this have for Assange and WikiLeaks, and how it influences people's minds, and why is she even being brought to the front and saying these things that are outside, really, and if you ask me, it's outside of her scope. Assange and the Philippines, they're distant in certain ways. To me, it's like her sphere of interest and her sphere of knowledge is totally outside of what Assange is doing and what WikiLeaks represents. And of course, she's a journalist, so when she's speaking of journalism, and she's got the Peace Prize for her journalism, and as you brought up, if Duarte was, kissing America's ass, and we wouldn't have this issue.
Yeah, Duterte. Yeah, what you said, it brought up two words into my mind. First of all, intimidation.
Yeah.
All other journalists are going to be intimidated because they're trying. Listen, they're trying to kill Julian Assange.
Yeah.
And the two things have come out in the last couple of months. First of all, his main accuser, or not accuser really, but the guy who said that he and Assange hacked elements. He's come out and said it was all lies. I can't remember his name. He's also, he might be Swedish. I'm not sure, but he's come out and he said it was all lies. And the second thing that's just come out is that the CIA and MI6 had plans to murder Assange, to poison him.
Wow.
Come on. I mean, you talk about intimidation for one thing, but in a just world, he should be free right now. You know, and those people should be held to account where the documentation has come out. That's the first thing, intimidation. The second thing is documentation. And this for me is terribly infuriating. Because we're drowning in conspiracy theories here. We are drowning in them. QAnon is if it's not a CIA psyops, I'll eat my bandana. Because what it's done is it's confusing actual historical events with these absurd things. Now, Hillary Clinton is one of my least favorite people, but she's not a baby eater. Okay, she's not eating babies. You know, the fucking goddamn pizza parlor. When I was going to open my own business, which I did open, just about a quarter of a mile up Connecticut Avenue from where that was. I looked at that place. That place doesn't have a basement, for Christ's sake. I was in the goddamn place thinking of renting it before the pizza people came in, for Christ's sake. You know, it doesn't even fucking have a basement.
Wow.
So that's probably a pretty salient point, but besides what I want to say, the thing about WikiLeaks is the documentation. It takes away the guesswork. It takes away the conspiracies. I can't tell you how many fuck faces I've dealt with online that go, well, that's just your opinion. And I have to say, it's not my opinion. It's a State Department information. It's a State Department message from one member of a State Department to another, verbatim. There's the date. There's the State Department stamps. It's what your people, your hires, your people that you're paying their salaries actually said they were going to do. So they said they were going to run a coup in Ukraine. This is what whatever, what's her first name? Newland said. And her husband Kagan, they're going to run a coup. We're going to run it. Here, this is the way it's going to go down, blah, blah, blah. That's what they did. It's in their words. That's the value. That's the real value of WikiLeaks. It takes all the conspiracy nonsense and throws it out the window, because now you've got exactly what these people say and did. Their communiques are available to you verbatim. But I can't tell you how many people I point that out to, and they can't connect it. It doesn't connect with them. They still want to insist that I made it up or that WikiLeaks made it up. No one made it up other than the actual people who were going to do that action. So that's what's so important about WikiLeaks. That's why it's a giant step. It's toward straightening out this fucked up world. Oh my God. Assange and those people are mightily important.
Right. You know what gets me though is people will discredit, or they'll just make any old excuse to just ignore WikiLeaks, and then they get all wrapped up in this QAnon and that's very similar. You can take the template of what WikiLeaks is and put it on QAnon, all these conspiratorial, secrecy and these pacts, the supposedly satanic pacts, and blah 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 blah. And as you said, eating children in the basement of a pizzeria kind of stuff. And none of that stuff is reality. It's comic book fiction, and I think that's a way that they channel the the angst and the frustrations of people in the working class, the rural people, and especially Trump supporters and those kinds of people that we talk about. Those guys are really they hate the political elites, but they're not for all the wrong reasons, because they're given these fictional narratives that are imagination, pure fiction. And then you get the reality, sit right here looking on the reality, and the reality is far worse than the fiction. It's because it's the reality, and these perpetrators of these injustices against the coups you talk about and details and so forth. This is a reality, whereas Hillary Clinton sitting having children and eating children in a basement of a pizzeria and InfoWars and places like that. I mean, I can almost guess how you feel about InfoWars. I hate InfoWars. I hate them.
Yeah, but weren't the emails that WikiLeaks released of the Democratic Party scuttling Bernie Sanders electoral whatever advances? I mean, wasn't that enough for people? They had to go to baby eating to think it was bad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, how absurd can you get? I mean,
it's like people have to have this tantalizing dark imagination, and when you look at the dark course of reality versus this craziness I almost want to say that people that are interested in QAnon and get involved in those types of things really don't actually believe that stuff. Most of them, they just entertain the idea, and that's what makes it interesting. It's entertainment. It's not reality. When you get into the reality becomes really scary.
And let's be fair about this, because Russiagate is just as much a stupid conspiracy, and it's been debunked by the people at the Gray Zone over and over and over in great detail. Aaron Mate has dedicated hundreds of pages to debunking all of it, and quite convincingly. Or the thing like the Havana Syndrome. Now, how many biologists have to come out and say, "Look, it's crickets. These are crickets that live there. That's what we've recorded are crickets. It's nothing else but crickets." And mass hysteria among a bunch of panicky right people who have these. If you have somebody at the State Department who thinks that Nicaragua is an island, they're going to get hysterical at the first opportunity. These are not sophisticated people. These people are chosen because they can be used, because they're useful
stooges, clowns,
and stupid. So it cuts both ways, and the ultimate result is this kind of utter confusion that people like that the CIA can use. They can measure. It's like what they did with MK Ultra and the drugs. They can measure the effect it has on society, and then determine how best to control people within that society. So my sense is that this is that the QAnon, for example, is a psyops operation, probably done by the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency. Who knows? The ONI might be involved. MI6, whatever. It's global now. To determine how far they can go. If they can tell people that Hillary Clinton's eating babies and people will believe them, they're probably going, "Oh, whoa, wow, we can really fuck with these people." Whether they can ultimately control them is another thing, which January 6th might have maybe given them a little inkling into the Pandora's box that they're fucking with. But
one of my pet ideas about QAnon is it provides a narrative that consolidates the political base. I like the idea that people are united in narrative. When they have a common idea or purpose, presented as kind of a storyline or like a fictional, fun comic book type storyline that they're presented with, it consolidates and they have something in common. It makes it easier to communicate. So they consolidate the political base against their enemies, and then they can use that and twist that in so many different ways to their own advantage. Once you have a political base that's buying into these big lies, they become almost addicted to it. It becomes the fiction becomes bigger than life. It's like then they can just, like you're saying, they could tell you almost anything, and people will eat it up and say, all right, and they'll act on it. There was the guy that went out and shot at that pizzeria that because he read all of Alex Jones's reports on that, and he thought, well, I'm going to go out and save these children, and he went out and shot at this pizzeria, and then later on, Alex Jones was like, oh, I'm so sorry. My rhetoric is hostile and it causes these problems. Then he goes back into the same crap. He's one of my least favorite people. He's in Austin too. He's in the state of Texas here where I'm at. And it's really, it's frustrating for me to see, for instance, when he talked about the Sandy Hook massacre and saying that was a government, government plot and all this, and that it was fake, and he had the victims of that ended up getting harassed and on Twitter and so forth, and just caused so much psychological distress. They brought him to trial on this, and he said, well, I don't believe that anymore. I believed it then and I had a right to say it, but I've seen the evidence. I don't believe it anymore. And then he went back to the story again after he got off the hook.
and didn't he say something to the effect that, what kind of idiot would believe anything I say? I'm just an entertainer.
Exactly. And you look at what he says and the things he does and the way he presents himself. It's and I read a lot of those articles that they put on InfoWars, and they're as I call them tedious rants, and they're not even based on fact. I mean, I read one the other day. Someone sent me that talked about transgender activists being sociopathic, and I'm like, that's a stretch. Even if you don't like transgender activists, that's a big stretch.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's in a broad sense, it's a literature we're dealing with.
Yeah,
it's a bad literature.
Yeah,
it takes advantage of the subjective nature of I guess of the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I've lost my train of thought. But anyway,
that's where you get into the power of narrative. Like I was mentioning early, narrative is something that you can take all of these subjectivities and you can put it into this narrative, and it consolidates the basic idea that people are united by. People that really hate Democrats, and now they have a very good reason to hate Democrats, and it doesn't have anything to do with reality of what Democrats are doing. They can escape that objective, horrendous world of terror and all the stuff that's actually being done into this nice little compartmentalized reality of comic book fiction, and still hate Democrats and still feel like they're justified in doing so, which I think they are, but not for those reasons. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, Hillary Clinton is crazy. I mean, but she's not eating babies.
Right. One thing we talked about earlier is about how things like the right-wing conspiracies involving QAnon have taken the vernacular of the left-wing conspiracies and really have some meat to them.
Yeah.
And take the Kennedy assassination. One of the people I've corresponded with is Peter Dale Scott, who's one of the premier Kennedy assassination investigators of all time, and he coined the phrase "deep state" back in the 70s, called the deep politics, deep state. And of course, what he meant by that was lying cocksuckers Alan Dulles here in our massive book,
Mm-hmm.
and all the and we talked briefly before the show about Noel Field and a Quaker who Dulles came to dislike because of he was a Quaker and he believed in peace,
Mm-hmm.
and would try to make bridges between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. That he set Field up and his family so that Stalin and the KGB thought that Field was working as a double agent for the U.S. And Field was arrested and sent to a gulag, as well as his wife and his two brothers. I think it was his two brothers or his brother and his nephew. They were literally imprisoned by Stalin based on lies that Alan Dulles sent out.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk about QAnon? There's your QAnon back in the 50s. That sort of thing. That's what's developed this pathology. It's been developing in the American psyche. I mean, you could go back to the beginning. On the one hand, Richard Drinnen talks about this in Facing West, brilliant book. He talks about this. He says, look, on the one hand, you got these assholes that are talking about community is what built America. The churches, the small towns where everybody got together. And on the other hand, they're talking about the rugged individual. The Daniel Boones who went out into the wilderness.
What you're saying
driver
makes me think of some of Richard Hofstadter's work, American political tradition. And, I think that rugged individualist kind of started with maybe Lincoln or something. Like, you think of this idea that the individual is of supreme importance and that we should be, self-reliant completely, without community. It's a good point you bring up, this contradiction between we started off with all these little towns or these utopian communities early on and these religious sects and whatnot. And then we have, on the other hand, the rugged individualism. It's like, how do we go from one place from one to the other? They're in complete contrast with one another. And then Richard Hofstadter, if I understood his work, when I've read the American political tradition, he talks about how our leadership and the way that these myths are created in our consciousness, they don't just come out of a vacuum. They come out of personalities a lot of times.
So we've all been lied to.
Yeah.
Well, my family didn't come here until recently, but we've all been lied to for over 200 years. So that brings us back to literature and trying to write the boat, trying to bring some balance to things, some sanity to it all. So if you have something like this Nobel list of literature laureates, but it's corrupted by the Central Intelligence Agency, where do we stand?
Right.
Now, as I look at this list, I see Harold Pinter, who saw right through the mask, and he won the Nobel Prize. So there's some hope. But there's a lot of people on this list who obviously were sellouts too. Czeslaw Miłosz, prime sellout. Pearl Buck, prime sellout. Henrik Sienkiewicz, a premier anti-Semite, won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Is it the one that won a couple years back? The one that they questioned because they said he was he allied with the regime that was persecuting Kosovo, Czechoslovakia, I think, or not Czechoslovakia. It was
Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia. There we go. I confused me.
Yeah, Tito.
Some of these guys, like, they have questionable politics. I mean,
sure. And the Seifert too is on that list. But so you got a mixture there. I mean,
the good news is, in this case, you have variety of perspectives getting celebrated, and that's what I think is good. You have all these different perspectives that are combated each other in the field of the public the public spotlight. I don't think most people care so much about literature as much as we would imagine, but the literature itself, as some people would say, our ideas, you've talked about the epistemology and how, I think it was you that talked about this, how our ideas, even though we don't realize it, what we think is based on what other people have thought previously and what the ideas they've brought to the table. So they are important. It's just that maybe people don't really engage with the root of that. But all these perspectives at war with each other and thrown onto the table, it's like, to me, that's just beautiful, because then you have the idea that the truth will prevail, and that's people that can actually think about things. You see all these different ideas on the table, and you look at them and objectively as you can, for people that are able to do that, philosophically adjust to the literature at hand and think about what's being said. Then that, to me, that's what creates the human mind and culture itself. That battle, that embittered, frustrated kind of war of ideas. We're going to take a brief break, but we'll be back and continue with this process of discussing literature and culture and how it relates to politics and the world politics and the stage at hand.
Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate?
I know what it is to be a victim of police brutality, to fight for justice, for Amadou Diallo, Abdel Louima, because I was there. Racial inequality is woven into the fabric of America.
2021, make your vote count now, count now, count now, count now. Vote now, vote now, vote now. Every card up is a ballot now.
We have to end inequality in our school and in housing and ensure we won't have crime and gun violence destroying our city. This is our moment.
Make it count, make it count, make your vote, make it count. We say, oh yeah, who's our candidate? Who's our candidate? Who's our candidate? Who's our candidate? Who's our...
Welcome back. I'm Dustin Pickering. We're discussing culture, politics, literature, the convergence thereof with Carlo Parcelli, my co-host. So what are your comments again on the way that these comments from the Nobel laureates and how they affect the public consciousness and the perception of telling the truth in journalism, and how this could actually be very dangerous in a way, just as thinking about Assange and how this legacy he's leaving of WikiLeaks, and what could potentially happen here. I mean, my guess is they'll kill the guy and then they'll lionize him, like as a big hero, and say, well, he's a martyr, and they'll make that out to be like a thing, but they'll still try to prevent further, concessions against power, that's my guess. I've seen it happens in history a lot, where they just go after somebody who's tearing down the power structure, and they destroy them, and then they're made into a hero. And it's only kish, it's not reality. It's not the reality. It's like that way they can almost excuse themselves of guilt and kind of concede to the public. It happens quite a bit with a lot of the, people that go out and try to tear this power structure apart and reveal the truth about it. And, we see the relations in WikiLeaks, through all of the dumps that have happened, all of these various, all the corruption is right there in front of us now. If anybody wants to look at it, it's there. I mean, we know it's there. It's like, there's no question about it. So we see that our government, the U.S. government, which we've long thought, is we're the good guys, and now we're seeing gradually where our power is dying down. We're not the only superpower, and so it's like there's a vacuum. I think a lot of this authoritarianism we're seeing, and it's both on the left and the right. I'm seeing a lot of the embittered political imbroglios and stuff going on that are really. I think there's like this big power vacuum, and as we decline in influence, it's creating a massive vacuum. And so all these various factions are competing to try to fill that vacuum and where we go next, and how we consolidate the power and who's going to take the power. And I think people get caught up in that. And when we're talking about the subjective nature of QAnon and how this kind of takes uses narrative to shift the power to in a certain way to channel it. And then, you have problems with, the decline of America as the only world superpower, and how we have to sort of adapt to that, and what's going to happen next. I mean, it's just a very confusing world right now. And that's my opinion, is that our power is in decline. So there's less cooperation. There's a lot of dissolution happening. And then all this authoritarian propaganda out there, the fighting on the internet, all of that has come straight from that power vacuum, where we are looking at an uncertain future, and people want to make sure that whatever perspective and goals they have are heard and directed. We go that direction, and it's just no cooperation. Thanks, Eunice, for your comments. Great job, guys. That's what she says. Wonderful. We're glad to hear you and hear from you. So keep watching. What do you think of that, Carlo? Idea that these narratives are designed to channel discontent a certain direction, and this power vacuum being created by the decline of the U.S. superpower and the U.S. political elite, and how they're trying to kind of channel these powers a certain way, these discontent a certain way, so they can create a different political structure altogether.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with anything you said. What I might add that there's an important year here. Let me just say, first of all, the Ressa and the Duratov thing, they're minor in the great scheme of things.
Right.
I wish that people as stupid as Maria Ressa were not in prominent positions. Let me just. Mm-hmm. It's clear. I have this great faith in people who actually learn what their profession is and
stick to their
by a kind of moral code,
right?
And know not to take money from murderers such as the CIA.
Or at least stick to their area of expertise instead of branching.
Or at least have a basic knowledge of the most critical journalistic enterprise of probably forever, and that's WikiLeaks. Yeah. But the year I'm thinking about is 2008, and that's the year that Wall Street collapsed essentially. Though we all paid to get them back up and running, because of the derivative scandal. Yeah. And it really collapsed the world economy. I have friends in Greece, Christa Valisaria, she describes the anxiety that the prescriptions on people's health care or maintenance infrastructure have been put on it by the fact that all of Europe, which had bought into these bogus instruments, has had to impose on all of its citizens. Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, all the southern countries are just devastated by that event. And so really I don't really see how relevant literature could be in all of this thing.
Right.
All of this. I wanted to say one other thing when you were talking about epistemology, and that is Harold Bloom's anxiety of influence. And this has to do with conversations we plan to have on the canon. And that is what Bloom says in that book, which I thought was really brilliant. I read it when I was very young, is that simply that, and Eliot talks about this to a great degree, T.S. Eliot. Prior, the literature that has gone before influences the literature that we have now, and that has to be that comprises the essence of what makes a canon. So if you don't know what has occurred before, even given your notions of how it was biased against people of color, how it was biased against women, all of which are true, you still will not understand what the situation is now. So how that contributes into the malaise that you just talked about is interesting. If you want to talk about fascism in that context, people will people who are ignorant will take the literary canon that they've never read or never encountered, but take the essence of it and turn it into a kind of racist instrument. So that you end up with this, like you said, this power vacuum that people like Steve Bannon,
right, absolutely,
amazingly
right out of that. We're going to take a brief break again, just for a short break, and come right back to this conversation.
Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate?
I know what it is to be a victim of police brutality, to fight for justice, for Amadou Diallo, Abner Louima, because I was there. Racial inequality is woven into the fabric of America.
2021, make your vote count now, count now, count now, count now. Vote now, vote now, vote now. Every card is a ballot now.
We have to end inequality in our school and in housing and ensure we won't have crime and gun violence destroying our city. This is our moment.
Make it count, make it count, make your vote, make it count. We say, oh yeah, who's our candidate? 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 Who's our candidate?
Welcome back to the Foreign Policy Review. Dustin Pickering. We're talking with Carlo Parcelli about the canon and the literary canon, and Harold Bloom. We picked up with that and how people perceive it as racism and as a tool of racism, and how that contributes to the power structures and power dynamics. We left off with talking about Steve Bannon coming out of this vacuum, this power vacuum, as a sort of fascist strongman, the intellectual arm of Trumpism, and how he basically is sort of what we were kind of getting at earlier about these various elements of in these dynamics competing to bring some kind of order to the new world that we're seeing emerge as power structure sort of collapses, and when the narratives that we've been told are being questioned and so forth. So I think what I was going to say is that literature to me is a questioning process. So it questions all these things and puts them into perspective. I don't think it has much real power over what's being done. Like I can't write a book and convince everyone to stand up against these coups. And, it's not going to happen. I mean, my book is not going to do that. And a lot of books won't do that. We've already had how many books written on these things, and it still hasn't persuaded people to say, look, we're not going to take this anymore. But I think that it helps, like me, from an individual perspective, make sense of these things. And maybe there are other people thinking the same thing that need a little affirmation. So one step in tow, it takes a little time to kind of push the snowball a little bit. I don't know how much effect it'll have in the long run, but I think it pushes the ideas a little more to where we want to be, rather than if we just let people like Steve Bannon jump in and do it without any kind of literary, questioning of his thing, his ideology, then what's going to happen? he's no questions asked. He's just going to jump in and do what he's going to do, which he did anyway, with success to a degree. We have fascism all over the world now. A lot of far right, taking over the different countries, and some things are shifting further right than they should be. It's just for me, the literary canon is a good tool to see where things are going. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how we have the African American voices coming out, and the younger people are getting interested in poetry. And poetry is such a niche market. It doesn't have any real power, but I think it can show where consciousness is developing and show what direction we're going. More so, it's like a compass more so than an actual, instrument to direct things, in my opinion. So we can kind of measure the effects that are going on through poetry. It's a good way of mapping out things, rather more so than trying to change them. And if that makes any sense from where I'm coming from, anyway.
No, it does. And in fact, it's the motherlode. You also have enduring literature like that abomination, the Turner Diaries. I mean, a poorly written piece of shit. But then you have people, you have popular authors. Whatever deity you believe in, and rest his soul. But what's his Brian Ellis? I can't remember his middle name, but he's also a sloppy writer. But if you want to take, so I don't know what there's a in the where we exist now, as opposed to what's going to be revered as literature later, seems to be, for some reason, an impossible question.
Yeah.
For society to answer. And there's no clearer example than say the Nobel Prize list for literature we have here. There's a number of people on here that no one reads anymore, and that's my business.
Well, Louise Gluck won recently, and that was a surprise because, I love her work. I think she's definitely deserving of honor. But to me, I don't know, considering some of the other laureates who've had some sort of political affiliation or have done, like you had the Russian writer who, I can't remember her name, but she wrote Zinky Boys, and she got a lot of harassment from her fellow countrymen for that. And a lot of threats and just in general, because she presented the evidence right before everyone, very humanistic way, that the Russians' involvement in Afghanistan was basically like America being involved in Vietnam, and how the Russians were treated by their own government, in that sense. And so, to me, like, what Louise Gluck, she's a great writer. She's a fantastic when it comes to, what she's saying and all that. But why the Nobel Prize for Literature? What bravery did she present, or what literary influence has she had that really merited that? Was it more like we needed an American during the Trump era to win the prize? I don't know. That's weird to me. It's like, I don't know what their methods are of choosing. They give some curveballs sometimes.
Yeah, I think she was a safe choice.
Yeah.
In a chaotic time. For me, I don't really care for her work that much.
All right.
I'm not a lyricist. I lean much more toward the epic. I'm of the mind that the Nobel Prize people should have been able to go back in time to 1882 and bestow the Nobel Prize on a 2-day-old James Joyce while he was being rocked in his cradle by his mother, and he never won the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, I know.
He's a monster. He just eats everybody alive. And why does he do that? Not because he's full of politics. Let's not confuse that. He's a humanist, and as anyone who followed the
beautiful writer too.
But it's in his language. It's his language. The same with Shakespeare. It's the language. The same with Chaucer. It's the language. And for me, that's what sets apart art from everything else. So anything that's going to have influence, it's not going to be the language. In this world we live in, especially where we live now, Washington D.C. for me, it's lies. It's not the truth of language that's going to win out. Lies win out hands down, everywhere. No one give like I like to say, a rat's rectum about great language, and that is seeped into a lot of the literature. Louise Gluck, as a lyricist, one of her main talents on occasion is that unique or exotic turn of phrase. And the reason I bring that out is because it's something I can't do, and I've always admired that in the lyricists. But beyond that, they don't seem to have that much going for them. I mean, we go down the list, though, and you find all kinds of exceptions. Harold Pinter, who wrote a really scathing editorial about U.S. involvement in the Middle East that made the rounds, and he's obviously on the far left. The next one, Dario Fo, who's been a great he just parodies European political theater. He just made a mincemeat of it. But then you have Seamus Heaney, who turned half his countrymen against him by going to accept I think a knighthood from the Queen. It's just and was basically someone who avoided the political theater. And this is Ireland and England. But I have a poetry friend, Kevin Kiley, who's just written an epic poem about the conflict between Ireland and England, and the centuries old. And he's not a Seamus Heaney fan. Derek Walcott's the next voice on the list. Here's a guy who's he was kind of like a fashionable leftist. He was a leftist, but at the same time, he really wasn't that offensive. He can work with people. Octavio Paz.
I feel, I don't know if you've heard of, you probably have heard of him, Sam Hamill. Have you heard of Sam Hamill?
Sure, Sam Hamill, yes.
Yeah, I'm good friends with an old friend of his. Yeah, he was excellent. He really stirred a mess with the Bushes when he did his Poets Against the War. And that goes back into literature, sort of combating the political structures. They invited a lot of poets to come and discuss poetry, and Laura Bush would shut the thing down because they were afraid it would get too political. And as Sam Hamill pointed out, when is poetry not political? Look at Whitman, and you just go back all the way back to the American tradition, very political, and social. And he put out that anthology, Poets Against the War, which is some of the best war poetry, anti-war poetry I've ever read. He's a fascinating poet, and he was a really good man too. He did a lot of great work with communities and stuff. So I think William Faulkner's statement that literature doesn't have to change anything; it can just be something to be a pillar for man to endure. I think that's its purpose, really.
Yeah, as far as Sam Hamill, he refused to go to the White House, right? He just flat out refused to do it. I was not impressed by that anthology that much.
Really?
I
thought it was good.
I don't know. I read into it. I did not read that much of it.
They took out his they had an entire portion of a library that was dedicated to submissions to that, and I believe they closed that section of the library after a few years. They had it open and then they closed it out, and I don't know what happened to all those stuff. They actually had hit pieces in the New York Times and in Wall Street Journal that were against him for what he was doing. I think he said a former Nixon speechwriter wrote an editorial against him, slandering him basically, because of the stirring he created with that anthology. It's quite an interesting affair there.
Yeah, I really wasn't that much aware of it.
I followed him on Facebook for a while, and I had a few conversations with him here and there. He's a really nice guy, very irritable guy, but very nice guy. And he was on the left too, very socialistic. Yeah,
I don't really see the rhetorical nature of a lot of that work being effectively literature.
right.
I can see where it would upset to a certain degree the status quo if it gained enough authority. It gets to be a complicated question because
Right.
I'm more concerned with creating an enduring art than I am with um, making a quixotic change.
Yeah.
Or
I feel the same way.
yeah, I don't.
Well, then you get into people like Howard Zinn, who compiled, all these documents of some of which were literary in nature, in the his book People's Voices, which was a supplement to People's History, and how that can create a change in consciousness, to relook at history, and you have all these voices that weren't really given much attention during that period, in the period they were written, and then they were brought to light all these years later to present another side of history that was ignored or was suppressed during that period, or during the period when the power dynamic was not allowing it. That to me, that's a good thing. It's a good to have of people writing in different perspectives, and even if they go ignored for 100 years, at some point someone's going to dig it up and say, oh, well, look what we've discovered. We found this document that says this and this, and it's very eloquently written. And, it reveals a lot of what we have been taught for so many years is untrue. And not only did that can in and of itself upset the power balance, because then people question what they're looking, the present, what they're looking at that moment, and whether or not it's just, what are we being told? Is it true? Is it a lie? Our history books are full of garbage, the ones that they teach in public schools. And just, a lot of it's just very slanted, or it doesn't tell gives you a full picture of how horrendous slavery was, And then you still have in the South, where I'm at, states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. We hear this ad nauseum, and it's like, the right to what?
Yeah.
What right? What right are you talking about? States' right to what?
Until they need federal funding to bail them out of a flood situation or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Then they want the funding. But yeah, I of course, I agree with that. I mean, I don't really know how to address it. I mean, I have some pretty radical opinions about people like Walt Whitman, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I feel was like probably one of the greatest hustlers and phonies of literature of all time, but with good reason. I mean, he obviously could not openly practice his homosexuality,
right.
and I think here's a guy who was alive in 1873 when one of the great, and living in the Northeast, when one of the greatest depressions or recessions, or whatever you want to call it, in American history occurred. There were thousands of people living on the streets. He had to walk over them when he left his offices. There's no way he could avoid it. But still, he's going on about this great progressive country and how marvelous it is. And it even gets to the point where, in poems like When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Blue, I think it is, where he talks about Lincoln's anus, in this kind of coded way, so that, in a way, if we want to honestly deal with Whitman, we have to deal with him like that. When he goes to deal with the wounded from the Civil War, he seems to have this kind of sexual disease where amputees turned him on. Those men weren't kissing him when he left. They didn't give him big long kisses. That's bullshit. So you got to deal with, this kind of conflict if you're really looking honestly at this guy this guy he was corrupt, or really a really nasty liar in a lot of ways, but his culture, the culture he lived in, sort of drove him to it. His only expression of his homosexuality were the Calamus poems, and in a sense, they've got some brilliant elements to them, and they were bold for their time, obviously, but still, the overall guy was he didn't have to embrace American culture the way he did. He could have. He wanted to create this kind of appeal. He wanted to kind of pander to what he thought Americans would what he thought his writing would make Americans create a kind of centrality to his work, and he achieved it. He miraculously achieved it. We have left wingers. We have the whole beat movement who just adored Whitman. They adored Whitman like they did Blake. Well, Blake and Whitman have nothing in common. Absolutely nothing in common. Whitman has cunning. Blake was crazy. It's just complete. Nobody's ever really taken a clear look at Whitman. I mean, Reynolds in his biography reveals some of this stuff. I think it's James Reynolds. I could be wrong. In his biography of Whitman, reveals some of the shadier sides of Whitman. But that, it's to me, it all really comes down to the literature kind of divorced from the political element. That you can always bring in the political element, but it has to be subsumed by the literary dimension, by the language itself, and the way it's expressed. Otherwise, you're just playing second fiddle to the politicians. You're just playing second fiddle to the journalists and to the media celebrities and that sort of thing. And that's one of the reasons I think poetry is like in the tank. That, and there's too many people doing it. So,
yeah. Well, that said, we can conclude the program today, and it's been wonderful to talk about the literary canon, its relation to politics and power, and the dynamics. And what we're seeing today is a decline of the U.S. as a world superpower, and so forth. And we have these factions declaring war against each other, and a lot of authoritarian atmosphere. General the left and the right both are kind of acting, we have all these cancel culture and all this rhetoric going around that you can't even say what you feel and think anymore, it seems like. And poetry is a good way to express yourself and to make sense of reality, and how that relates to the politics of the Nobel Prize and journalism and the integrity of telling the truth and using language in a responsible and beautiful way. That was what our conversation was today. And I want to read Eunice's comment. Eric Adams' track record speaks for him, which is why I am supporting. Been there since January. Thank you so much, Eunice, for your comments. We appreciate them on the program. So this has been the Foreign Policy Review. I hope you guys will join us next week, Thursday, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, 12 p.m. in Eastern Standard Time. And we'll discuss a little more in depth about the foreign policy and how the world is changing. And you can get a little up to date on some of these things through us. Thank you so much for joining the program. Subscribe to our YouTube. Please do not hesitate right now. Subscribe to our YouTube. Go check out our channel. We have a wonderful batch of programs for the Parrot, New York Parrot. So do that. Look into it and tell us what you think. And we'll have a program later today, the Literary Corner, which will be excellent, and we'll talk a little more about literature there. So without further ado, have an excellent day, everybody. Go out and vote when you have.
They want us to vote by party affiliation, but here's the problem: we've been voting for party affiliations predominantly as a Democrat to the point where now we haven't gotten what we're supposed to get. We're willing to hope and pray that the next person that slaps on a Democratic label is the one. I'm not willing to continue to allow our communities become a part of a political gang. It's about who has the interests of the community, and as a community advocate, I think I've demonstrated that. The political gang that's taking place within our communities is no different from the gangs that's in the streets. Democrats blue, Republicans red, but yet our community hasn't gotten anything. Our parents can't even take their children outside. They won't allow our children to go outside by themselves, not even to the corner store. It's time to stop playing political lines and start talking about community's agendas. This November, you're voting for somebody that has the voice as well as the well intentions of the community. You're voting for somebody that was born and raised in Harlem, and that's about Harlem. You're voting for me, Alpheus Marcus.
Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate? Who's the candidate?
I know what it is to be a victim of police brutality, to fight for justice, for Amadou Diallo, Abdel Louima, because I was there. Racial inequality is woven into the fabric of America.
2021, make your vote count now, count now, count now, count now. Vote now, vote now, vote now. Every card is a ballot now.
We have to end inequality in our school and in housing and ensure we won't have crime and gun violence destroying our city. This is our moment.
Make it count, make it count, make your vote, make it count. We say, oh yeah, who's our candidate?